Welcome and thank you for joining us today for a Land Services SA webinar on CAD drafting tips for closures and joins. This is a pre-recorded session with a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. We ask you to kindly hold all your questions until the allocated time when one of our subject matter experts will be able to assist. Land Services SA's Industry Education Program covers key topics and frequently asked questions and is designed to help industry keep up to date with current practices. Our subject matter experts assist in preparing and delivering our Industry Education Webinar Series, utilising their years of experience and respected place in the industry. This webinar was prepared by myself, Martine Aldan, a Plan Lodgement Analyst at Land Services SA specialising in the support of DPL plan lodgements, and Rui Afnan, a Senior Licensed Surveyor at LSSA, having worked in a variety of locations within the state of South Australia. He has worked on projects such as the Electronic Plan Lodgement, EPL, and more recently the Digital Plan Drawing Standard for Digital Plan Lodgement, DPL. In today's session, we will start by looking at why drafting to the DPL CAD standard can flow through to accurate closures and a smoother lodgement process. We will walk through the top 5 drafting essentials, the key things to get right from the start to avoid common errors in your closures and joins data. We'll cover how the CAD and PPR validation warnings can help identify and fix drafting issues. We'll look at some of the most common causes of missing data, particularly around chainages, bearings, and distance labels, and how to address them. There's a demo video of practical examples you can refer back to, and finally, review a summary of the key points before opening up for live Q&A session with our subject matter experts. The transition to the Diagram tab, Closures and Joins features in DPL Plan Lodgement is critical to strengthening the integrity of the cadaster, enabling future digital capabilities, and supporting more efficient plan preparation over time. To support this, LSSA is progressing targeted system enhancements based on early feedback. We are continuing direct engagement with industry and providing updated guidance, support materials, and training. Drafting your DWG file to the LSSA DPL CAD standard ensures accurate and complete closures data, streamlining the lodgement process by reducing corrections, overrides, and acknowledgements. In this webinar, we will look at how to identify common drafting errors and share some specific tips and tricks to avoid issues. Here are 5 essentials to get right from the start when drafting your DPL plans. Layers. Use the correct layers for all labels, line work, and parcel identifiers. Incorrect layers means missing or inaccurate closures. Road widths and bearing labels. Ensure bearing and road width labels are placed correctly within road parcels. Incorrect placement is one of the most common causes of missing bearings along roads in the closures report. Survey marks. Place survey marks correctly and ensure proper connection lines to each mark. Complete and accurate connection lines are essential for the joins data to be generated without errors. Running chainages. Create and position chainage labels correctly to support parcel and joins data. Polylines for parcel boundaries. Do not use polylines where distance, bearings, or chainage labels are present. The system cannot correctly associate labels with polyline segments. Getting these 5 fundamentals right from the start will significantly reduce errors in your closures and joins report, streamlining the overall plan lodgement process. Validation reports can help you catch drafting issues early. The CAD and PPR validation reports flag warnings in your DWG that relate directly to the CAD standard, and some of those warnings will also show up as errors in the closures report, requiring overrides and acknowledgements. So here on the left, we're looking at reference marks bearings. The system checks whether the bearings in your reference mark schedule matches the connection line to the PM. If it doesn't, you'll see a warning like actual line bearing differs or merged mark symbol has no valid connection line. For survey marks, make sure every mark on the exaggerated layer has a matching mark on the true layer and vice versa. Common warnings here include attributes differing between exaggerated and true pairs, missing exaggerated marks, or marks sitting on the wrong layer, for example on BRMRK instead of BRMRK true. For bearing and distance labels, the system checks that each bearing label is consistent across all of your diagram sheets. Common warnings here include back bearings, labels sitting outside the viewport, mismatched labels between sheets, or labels not applied to a line. For distance labels, check that each distance label matches the line it's associated with. Another common validation is features outside of plot area. If features like marks, lines, or labels extend beyond the plot boundary, the system will flag them. Resolving these warnings in your CAD and PPR reports will often prevent corresponding errors and overrides in closures. Let's briefly look at some of the most common reasons why chainage labels end up as missing data in closures. For running chainages, the distance value for a running chainage label needs to match the actual line length or the adjusted length if a distance scale factor is applied. Secondly, when you create a chainage label, make sure you click on a vertex point of the line the chainage is referring to. If you don't click on this vertex along the line, the coordinates won't populate the chainage block attributes correctly, and the chainages won't be picked up. You can see in these images how the attributes should look when created correctly. The third thing to watch for is line alignment. All line segments within a chainage run must be on the same angle. In this example, there's a boundary line, an abuttal line, and a connection line. If any of the lines sit at a slightly different angle, the chainage run may not be recognised, and the distances will be missing. It's subtle, but it's one of the most common reasons chainages fail validation. This video demonstrates each of these tips in a CAD environment, covering some common mistakes and shows the correct approach. Common errors and how to fix them. Let's look at some examples of these top 5 essentials. Starting with layers. If parcel lines are placed on the incorrect line layer, this can result in parcels not being created in the closures report in the way that we would like. When parcel lines for allotments and lots are not on the L parcel layers, then the parcels created are usually the wrong parcel type. In this example, the parcel lines were placed on the L abut layer, and therefore construction parcels have been created instead of allotment parcels. We have 4 construction parcels in this example. In order to fix this, we would need to go to the DWG file and update the layers. So we would have to change the layers that were sitting on the L abut layer to the L parcel layer. Once the layers have been updated, then it's just a matter of saving and re-uploading the DWG. And this is what our corrected drawing looks like when we re-upload it and open it in closures. So we've got 4 allotments, 13, 14, 15 and 16, and they've been created as parcel type allotment and not construction. The next example is when a parcel identifier has been put on the wrong layer. In this example, we can see 3 allotments have been created and they have been identified: allotment 13, allotment 14 and allotment 15. We know that there should be 4 parcels in this plan, 13, 14, 15 and 16, but allotment 16 has not been created. Instead, we have a common property parcel that's been created in its place. If we have a look at the DWG file, we can see that 13, 14 and 15 have all been placed on the right layers, but the allotment identifier for 16 has been placed on the A road layer. And this is why our parcels haven't been created. In order to fix this, then this identifier would need to be put onto the correct layer, saved and re-uploaded into Salus DPL. Once the corrected file has been uploaded, then we can see that DPL closures will process it correctly and we end up with allotment 13, 14, 15 and 16. The next example for essential drafting tips is road label placement. In this file we can see a couple of versions of road labels. The first one's being placed correctly in the middle of allotment 505 here. We've got a bearing label 85 18 30 and it is very close to the road width label. Over on 504 we've got a bearing label at the top of the parcel and the road width label at the bottom of the parcel. These 2 labels are not close enough in order to be associated, and when the data is processed from the file, it will only assign the bearing label to one side or the other for each of these lines along the road. We can see that in the closures report where we have a bearing label and a road width label close enough in order to be associated with the road, and it has validated the bearing against both sides of the road. Where we have just the one bearing label in the middle of the road and no road width label, then unfortunately we've only been able to assign the bearing to one side of the road or the other, and that's the case here and further up the road here where we just have a bearing label but no road width label. And this is the same for easements where you might have easements with parallel lines. If you just provide the one bearing label in the middle of those parallel lines, we'll only be able to associate data with one line and not both. In the case where you don't have a road width label to add to it, the bearing labels will need to be provided for both sets of lines. So you'll need a bearing label for the top and a bearing label for the bottom line. The next drafting tip is in regards to survey marks. To reduce missing survey marks in the joins reports, ensure the connection line geometry matches the corner fixing details in the reference marks box. So this connection line here, we've got a length and an angle, and that should match our reference marks box with the bearing and the distance. If you are using true and exaggerated marks, ensure that you do have the corresponding lines. So if there is a true line connecting the survey mark, the true survey mark to the corner, then there must also be an exaggerated line. Make sure that connection lines are snapped to the center of the survey mark block. Running chainage, how to get it right. It's important to use the latest template and the latest chainage block. You can tell if you've got the latest block loaded in your DWG because the name of the block is chainage in uppercase, and you can use this to verify you are using the right one. It's also important to have the coordinates listed under the attributes, and those coordinates relate to the vertex along a line that you are trying to reference with that distance. As I said, changes must refer to a vertex along a line, otherwise the polygon can show with missing dimensions. In this example here, this chainage block 103.55, the coordinates are referring to the centre of this peg. The line that it's referring to does not have a vertex and it's not relating to that. Therefore, this chainage was missing, and in this example, the closures report was unable to create this construction parcel because it couldn't verify the distance 103.55. Another important factor is to check that abuttal lines are snapped to connection lines and parcel boundaries along chainage runs. We do find that sometimes the extract files are used, and this can cause a slight mismatch between a connection line and an abuttal line. And any break within the line could be enough to cause this chainage run to not be able to be validated along the full run. Check that the angle of the geometry of the line along chainage runs is all the same. So in this case, we've got consistency of angle across all of those lines in that chainage run, and that way we'll be able to go from distance to distance along the run. Drafting tip number 5, polylines and natural boundaries. Avoid polylines for parcel boundaries when distance and bearing labels exist. So for a line like this, which is a polyline in your DWG, which has a distance label, has a bearing label, and in this case has a chainage label, our data processing will struggle to be able to validate the distances against those lines as they are connected to each other. And therefore, validations will fail for these lines. And in your closures report, these lines will show up as missing data. There is an exception to this, and this is where splines have been used for natural boundaries. With splines in closures, our processing will try and reconcile that line and create a series of very small lines and place a point number at the start and the end of each one of these lines. It creates a lot of noise in your closures for these parcels, as you end up with literally hundreds of lines and hundreds of points and no label data to verify against each one of those lines. I think in this file there's over 180 small lines. In these instances, we would recommend that you go back to your DWG file and change this spline for a polyline. Use a fairly low accuracy. In this case, I think my accuracy was about 12. It still has its variation. It shows the shape fairly accurately, but it won't end up with hundreds and hundreds of very small lines and points along this boundary. This will also benefit the time it takes to process the DWG file once you upload it to DPL. DPL processing has a really hard time with splines and takes a lot of processing power to come up with those hundreds and hundreds of very small lines and points. So we would recommend that with your splines, you replace them out with simplified polylines and upload them. Some additional drafting practices to help with data processing for your closures reports. Draft a single diagram in model space with one set of parcels and one set of parcel identifiers to prevent duplicate parcels in the closures reports. Ensure that the MGA zone in the title block matches the coordinates that the geometry of the diagram has been drafted in model space. If you are required to show a second bearing datum, show it on the A general layer on the sheet, not within the title block. Regarding double and hidden lines, Double and hidden lines will create missing distance labels in the closures report. It's best to delete duplicate lines. By applying these standards with correct layers, clean line work, accurate chainages, and disciplined identifier usage, you will consistently produce complete closures reports and enjoy a smoother lodgement process. In summary, use the PPR validation reports to identify issues early. The warnings are there to help you, so review them before lodging. Wherever possible, fix issues in the DWG file itself, rather than relying on overrides in the diagram tab. Getting the source file right makes everything downstream smoother. Make sure you're using the latest version of the chainages block. Your line geometry needs to match the labels. DPL checks that the labels are consistent with the lines they're associated with. Place survey marks blocks correctly so the diagram plan draws accurately in the diagram tab. Ensure that attributes are correct for survey marks, especially true and exaggerated pairs. You can update to the new 2026 release of the DPL template routines, blocks and tool palettes. These 6 points cover the most common issues we see, and getting them right will save you a lot of time when lodging. The recording of this webinar is available to watch from Land Services SA's Industry Education Hub Library, where you can also find a range of educational and support materials to assist you in your day-to-day work. A PDF of the slide deck will also be available to download and print. That concludes the recorded webinar section. Thank you for listening. Please remain online for the live Q&A session.